Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have another paranormal video to share with you guys. This is actually more of a deep dive into a ghost that I've already touched on in another video that I posted on this channel. It was the second paranormal video I posted, and it was called The Haunted Captain of Queen Street. And that video was a look at a bunch of the famous ghost stories from the province that I'm originally from, Newfoundland, and a lot of them focused around St. John's, Newfoundland, and this was one of those stories. And it was such an interesting story. I asked you guys to comment if you wanted me to go deeper into it, and so many of you did, so we're getting into it now. This is the story of Catherine Snow. Now, Catherine Snow was the last woman who was ever hanged in Newfoundland, in St. John's to be specific. And her story is one that just really blew my mind, especially when we get to the end, to the almost 200-year later update. So let's get started. Catherine Snow was born in a small Newfoundland town called Harbour Grace. Once she got older and was a young woman, she moved from Harbour Grace to another town called Salmon Cove. And when she moved there, she met a man named Jon Snow. No Game of Thrones affiliations. And in 1828, the two of them got married. And they went on to have 7 kids together. And no doubt they had their hands full with 7 kids. I can't even imagine. Anyway, soon after that, it quickly became evident that the two of them really managed to push each other's buttons, and they frequently got into pretty explosive fights. It got to the point where Catherine would fight back and she would throw things at him, things like that. It got really explosive sometimes. And so it wasn't exactly a secret either. You know, a lot of the people in town, the people in the neighborhood knew about it. So when in August of 1833, Jon Snow went missing, people first began to quietly wonder and then loudly wonder if Catherine had anything to do with his disappearance. Shortly after his disappearance, an investigation was launched, and then eventually some of his dried blood was found at the place where John would often go fishing. So eventually Catherine, her first cousin Tobias, and a third man who was kind of a servant around the house, his name was Arthur, they were all implicated in the murder. Shortly thereafter, Catherine just freaked out and she ran away. She just ran straight into the woods, but of course she couldn't stay there forever, and eventually she came out. She went home to Harbour Grace, where she turned herself into the police. In confessions, it was said that John was shot, but his body was never found, and in fact, it was Arthur who was quite vocal in the fact that they had shot him. The trial took place in the city in St. John's in 1834, and while all of them had at some point given some kind of a confession, when it came down to it, they all pled not guilty. So Catherine and her cousin were represented by a lawyer named George Henry Emerson, while Arthur was represented by a man named Brian Robinson. So the Attorney General, during the trial, he had this to say to the all-male jury. He said, "I can't prove which one fired the shot, but both were present for the murder." So in that, he's talking about Tobias and Arthur. He then went on to say, "As to Catherine Snow, there is no direct or positive evidence of her guilt, but I do have a chain of circumstantial evidence to prove her guilty." And it was during the trials that Catherine found out that she was pregnant with her 8th child. On January 13th, 1834, after only 30 minutes of deliberation, that jury found them all guilty. Almost immediately, both Tobias and Arthur were hanged. Many people of the city really felt that Catherine was not guilty, and eventually the Catholic Church even became invested in having her sentence overturned. A local bishop really took a keen interest in the case and did his best to not have her hanged. But in the end, the best that the governor would do would be to grant her stay until after the child was born. On July 21st, 1834, crowds gathered on Duckworth Street, which, as someone who has, lived in St. John's and spent a lot of time there, Duckworth Street is, a very popular, busy street, and it's just wild to think of all of this happening on that street. It really gives you a weird feeling. But anyway, Snow walked out onto the stage, I guess, the area where the hanging was to take place, and her final words were, "I was a wretched woman, but I am innocent of any participation in the crime of murder." And it was then, shortly thereafter, just moments later, that she became the final woman ever hanged in Newfoundland. So it is shortly after that, in fact, just days after, that people in the town started reporting sightings, seeing her ghost or an apparition. And it wasn't just, crazies on the street who were reporting it. It was very well-known members of society. And in fact, it got to the point where even the local newspapers were reporting on the so frequent sightings. There's a part here from a website that I found about the case where it says, in 1846, the old courthouse where she had been convicted and hanged burned to the ground. Catherine's restless spirit was seen on the grounds after the fire, and during the construction of the replacement courthouse. She was also seen in the new building after it opened in 1847. The building was once again destroyed by fire during the Great Fire of 1892. So that's two courthouses where she was frequently seen haunting, both burned to the ground. That's so eerie. To this day, she is still seen outside in the area where her execution took place. She has also been seen throughout the building, climbing the stairs, or silently drifting down a hallway. By many employees of the courthouse and visitors to the facility, other incidences for which Catherine's spirit receives the credit or the blame, depending on how you look at it, include the elevator moving from floor to floor, seemingly of its own accord, and phantom footsteps being heard moving along what appear to be empty hallways. And around this case and the story of Catherine Snow, there's always been just an air in the city, a feeling of great injustice that had been done. And it was something that really bothered people for years and years and years after her hanging, to the point that in 2012, they reopened the case. And to me, as a Newfoundlander, this is such a Newfoundlander thing to do. So here it says, on April 1st, 2012, a restaging of Snow's trial was held in St. John's. Approximately 400 local residents attended. Snow's modern-day defense lawyer argued the evidence of the affair is so prejudicial, it's impossible to extricate it from the statements. There's no way she could have had a fair trial, and after hearing all of the evidence, the modern-day jury found her not guilty. And now, of course, the hope is that her spirit can finally go and be at peace almost 200 years after her death. And I guess only time will tell at this point. I haven't heard any updates if, because 2012, that was 7 years ago now, which is wild. 2012 seems like it was, last year or something, but I haven't heard any updates on if she's still being seen and felt around the courthouse and on Duckworth Street, but I guess only time will tell. And I'll definitely let you know if I do hear any updates. So you guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I think it's such an interesting story. I think it's so interesting that they redid the trial for her to try to be able to put her finally at rest. And I just think that's such a wonderful gift to try to give to someone who has clearly been suffering for many, many, many years. Anyway, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, you should subscribe. It's free, but it helps me a ton. Like the video, and I will see you guys on Friday with a very, very interesting book talk video. Bye, guys.